Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm reviewing ERYS, the newest album from Jaden Smith. This project is a follow-up to his 2017 debut project SYRE, an album that overall I didn't really care for all too much, but I did think the project had a lot of potential within it on Jaden's part. There were some aspects of the project that I didn't really like, but I did think the production overall was pretty neat, and like I said before, Jaden Smith's potential on that project was certainly there, and I was hoping that over time he'd be able to work out some of the imperfections within his music and maybe one day release a good or even great project. Between the release of SYRE and ERYS, Jaden certainly hasn't been a quiet artist by any means, dropping several singles, EPs, a mixtape as well, all of which I thought were like SYRE in the sense because I still felt like there was some potential within this material, but for the most part Jaden just wasn't reaching his full potential. For the most part, a lot of the material he released I thought was pretty boring and uninteresting overall. However, I came into ERYS kind of hopeful, just hoping that maybe here on the next big project of his, he would really put some of that potential to good use, maybe work out some of the problems that was present in his previous material, and come through with a solid project. Overall, with ERYS, I can't necessarily say that I'm greatly disappointed or anything because my expectations for this album weren't, super high or anything. But I am maybe the slightest bit disappointed with the quality of this thing. Not that it's too much worse or anything compared to SYRE or anything. It's just shockingly similar to SYRE in terms of both quality and just the overall style and really a bunch of things about this project. And I do understand that some of it is intentional given that this project is supposed to be a bit of a follow-up to that record. The title of this record is SYRE backwards. There's obviously some thematic connections between the two, and the structuring of the albums is very similar as well. However, it's more surprising to me that a lot of the strengths and weaknesses present on SYRE are also the same strengths and weaknesses present here on ERYS. Speaking about this project generally, I feel like the production here is easily the strong point on the project, much like it was on SYRE. Stylistically and quality-wise, the production is very similar, having this very grand, opulent feel. It's very apparent that Jaden went all out when it came to picking the production here for this project, and for the most part, it doesn't really disappoint all that much. There are a couple moments here on this thing where the production maybe tries something a bit different, but I will talk about these things later on a bit more. But overall, I do feel like the production here on ERYS is easily the strong point. When it comes to Jaden and his performances here on this project, once again, they're shockingly similar to a lot of the performances that he was giving on SYRE, as well as a lot of material that he dropped between that album and this one. A lot of the flows here on this thing still feel kind of monotonous, and he still feels kind of awkward in the ways he's kind of putting these bars together at times too. His singing here on this project isn't all that great either still. He does try more often on this project to manipulate his voice and auto-tune or some other kind of effect, not only when he's singing but also when he's rapping, which does kind of make it a bit different from some of the previous material he dropped, but I still don't really think it sounds all that great, and Jaden's performances here on this thing once again are easily the weakest part of the album. When it comes to the lyrics and songwriting here on ERYS, once again, they don't really feel all too different from what Jaden was doing on SYRE. It doesn't really feel like he's matured all that much or improved his lyric writing skills, really, which is kind of disappointing considering I felt like the lyrics were probably one of the weakest points on SYRE and definitely something that I think needed to be improved on. And it's a shame that coming into ERYS, they're really not improved all that much. I mean, to some extent, I was expecting similar lyric topics and themes, given that, like I said before, this album is connected to SYRE in a sense, but still, the amount of kind of filler bars that you get here on this album, or just kind of corny lyrics that pop up on this thing as well, it doesn't make for a super engaging listen. And once again here on this project, much like on SYRE, Jaden Smith wears his influences on his sleeve so prominently to the point where it doesn't really seem like Jaden has too much of a personality of his own here on this project. Really, some of his biggest influences are artists like Kanye West, Brockhampton, Kid Cudi, Tyler the Creator, Travis Scott as well, just seem to kind of make up small parts of what is pulled together to be Jaden's personality here on this project, to the point where a couple of those artists I mentioned previously even pop up on this project at various points. When it comes to individual moments and tracks here on this album, I think that the album opener, the multi-track long Pink, is a pretty solid start to this project overall, easily one of the best moments on this album as a whole, which isn't all that surprising considering the multi-part Blue opening to SYRE was also one of the best moments on that album. I will say that this opening is a bit similar to that opening from SYRE, which does make it a bit less interesting overall, but still, I do quite like the feel of this multi-track segment of the album is going for. It feels very grand. It's a very engaging start to the album as well. A lot of the featured vocals on this thing sound really nice too. And even Jaden's performances here on this track are probably some of the stronger ones on the album. They're not super engaging overall by any means, but like I said, there are some of the stronger ones that pop up on this project. The track Noise that immediately follows this multi-part Pink song is one of the cuts on this thing I was most looking forward to hearing, considering it has a Tyler the Creator feature, and I've been pretty interested in a lot of the stuff he's been doing recently. However, I do think the track is maybe slightly underwhelming in a sense. I do like the production here on this track. I think it's some of the more engaging and interesting production to pop up on this project. And even Jaden's delivery here on this track is one of the more energetic ones. However, the Tyler the Creator feature on this track is pretty underwhelming in my opinion. His flow's pretty basic sounding. He just doesn't sound super excited here on this track or anything. And yeah, there's not all too much else to say about it really. However, overall, I would still say that Noise is probably one of the stronger cuts on the album for what it's worth, because immediately after this track, I feel like the album starts to drop several pretty uninteresting and unmemorable cuts. A lot of songs towards the middle portion of this album, I feel like just don't really have a ton interesting going for them. Like I said, the production on a lot of these tracks is still pretty decent overall, but Jaden's flows and lyrics and singing that pops up on a lot of these songs just isn't engaging enough to hold my attention, really, and a lot of these tracks just kind of blend together. The track Fire Department that pops up towards the middle of this album is probably one of the more odd moments on this project overall, and one of the few moments on this thing that doesn't really seem to blend together, mostly because the instrumental to this track is like a punk rock instrumental, which doesn't really sound anything like a lot of the other instrumentals on this project, some of which do have some rock influence to them. They might have some guitars or something like that, but nothing quite like what Fire Department is going for. I mean, it's a straight up like punk rock song for the instrumental. It's odd. Surprisingly, it's not one of the worst cuts on the album, despite being really out there. But even though it's one of the more interesting cuts on this thing, I do feel like it really sticks out in a not very good way in the track listing. The track Summertime in Paris that also features Jaden's sister Willow is another one of the cuts on this album that I feel like is one of the highlights, I guess you could say. I don't think it's a great track by any means, but I do think the chemistry between Jaden and his sister here on the song is pretty nice, and the kind of cutesy vibe that this track has going for it is a bit more unique and interesting compared to a lot of the other sounds present on the project. I do just wish that this track didn't go on for as long as it did, because I do feel like once the track is about half over or so, it kind of starts to lose steam. Unfortunately, after this track, you have the tracks Blackout and Pain back to back, which is probably put together my least favorite segment of this entire album, given that these two songs feel just really drawn out, really boring to listen to. The instrumentals are some of the least interesting on the project as a whole, and Jay's performances on these two tracks are among the least interesting on this entire project too. It's just this moment in the album where I feel like this really slow-moving and kind of tedious project hits like glacial speeds of progression, and it's just a real pain to listen to. Fortunately, after this couple of tracks, I do feel like the album picks up the pace a bit more, and the last few songs on the project are once again some of the stronger ones on it overall, or at least some of the more interesting. The song Chateau is just a pretty basic banger that features A$AP Rocky. I do feel like his feature on this track is kind of underwhelming too, but compared to the last couple of tracks on the album, it stands out as being a lot more energetic and as a result a bit more interesting, so I really don't have too many complaints for it. The track On My Own with Kid Cudi is probably my favorite in the entire track listing, mostly due to Kid Cudi's feature. He does the hook here to the track, which is just really smooth sounding, really catchy too. He really just does kill it here on the hook to the track, and I like how it fits in with the rest of the track and the somber tone that it has going for it. Overall, I really like this feature here, and even Jaden's performances on this track, while they're not some of the stronger ones on the album, I can at least say that they fit in pretty nicely with the more somber tone that the track is going for. While On My Own isn't like one of my favorite songs of the year or anything, it's definitely the highlight from this album. The track Riot is a bit more of a dull track compared to the previous one, but it does feature some more interesting instrumentation, and the closing track to this thing, the title track, is, while not really a good song in my opinion, at least it's kind of interesting given that it's a pretty lengthy track, but there's a lot going on in it. Lots of different tonal shifts, the instrumental changes a lot too, the way Jaden's performing here changes as well. It really feels like Jaden just pulled a bunch of different ideas and kind of mashed them together into this Frankenstein monster of a closing track. And I don't really think it works all that nicely. It's very all over the place, nothing really comes together in a very coherent manner. None of the performances Jaden gives are all that great, and the fact that the instrumental is just constantly changing and morphing makes it one of the more formless and forgettable in the track listing as well. However, I can at least kind of appreciate the grandness and the scale of this closing, if anything. Overall, like I said before at the start of this review, ERYS feels painfully similar to the project that it's trying to follow up. It really just feels like, for the most part, Jaden hasn't really grown or changed all that much as an artist between the release of SYRE and ERYS, as a lot of the strengths present on SYRE and the strengths present on ERYS are the same, and the weaknesses between the two albums are also very similar as well. The only thing that I think ERYS has going for it that's better than SYRE is the features overall, mostly because of that Kid Cudi feature I mentioned previously. But unfortunately, compared to SYRE, which, like I said, showed a lot of potential, ERYS, while technically speaking, yeah, it does show that same potential in it. The fact that it's been, almost 2 years at this point, and Jaden really hasn't improved all that much, it has me feeling a lot less hopeful and excited for the future of Jaden's career compared to what I was feeling after hearing SYRE for the first time. Not only that, but I do also feel like ERYS to some extent is a lot more messy and less structured compared to SYRE 2. Mostly with tracks like Fire Department and the closing track, and even the opener too, which, like I said, while it is one of the highlights here on the album, at least compared to Blue, it's a lot messier and a lot more all over the place, even if it is a bit more pleasant sounding than the rest of this project. ERYS overall isn't a terrible project or anything, it's just kind of painfully underwhelming, I guess would be the best way to put it, especially coming off of some of the potential that I feel like was showcased on SYRE. And overall, while I feel like both albums are pretty similar in terms of quality, I do feel like that album just slightly surpasses this one, mostly on account of kind of being first and doing a lot of the stuff that this album does just before this album got a chance to do it. But, yeah, overall, I didn't really care for this album all too much. If you're a Jaden Smith fan, if you've liked the stuff that he's put out in the past, you'll probably like this too, so you should probably check it out. And if you haven't liked any of the material that he's dropped in the past, this album probably isn't going to change your mind, so I wouldn't recommend checking it out. But yeah, that is just my own personal opinion here on this project. If you happen to disagree, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this project in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you also leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. So if you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.